According to data released by the Indian government on November 29th, India's GDP growth rate from July to September was 5.4%, significantly lower than the 6.5% predicted by international organizations and lower than the data from April to June. Subsequently, major organizations predicted that India's economic growth rate this year would be lower than expected at the beginning of the year, and it would be difficult to reach 7%. What is more worrying is that the manufacturing industry, which the Indian government pays great attention to, has grown very little. Therefore, many people have come out to sing the pessimism of the Indian economy, believing that its structural problems are serious and it may fall into a trough. Surprisingly, the Western media was still singing praises for India a few months ago, believing that it would replace China and become the engine of world economic growth. How did the style suddenly change? In fact, I talked about it in the previous video that India, as a populous country, has a supported economy and it will not be too bad. But India has never really prospered in the past. After Modi came to power, he changed the currency, modified the GDP algorithm, and borrowed to build infrastructure to make the GDP data look better than when the Congress Party was in power. That's all. Everything Modi boasted about, including making India the world's manufacturing center and a developed country in 2040, has become a joke around the world. Few people believe it except fans of BJP and Hinduism. But the Western media, those journalists who have been in the financial world for decades, will they not see through Modi's tricks? Of course they can. The United States has well-known institutions such as Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Rand, which are very familiar with how to evaluate the fundamentals of a country. But for political needs, especially the need to discredit China, they show the good side of India and keep silent about its shortcomings. Just like CNN and BBC, they do not report that Hindus persecute Muslims and demolish mosques with the connivance of Modi, but add a death filter to Xinjiang and accuse China of violating the human rights of Muslims. Western media have always reported in a way that is beneficial to themselves. When the United States needs to isolate China and reorganize the Western supply chain, praising India and discrediting China will inevitably become the main tone of the media. So why are Western media discrediting India again now? Obviously, the United States has harvested countries around the world after the epidemic, letting the US dollar flow back through high interest rates, and then buying the bottom through the US dollar after the asset prices of other countries have dropped. But when harvesting China, the Americans failed as always. However, due to the all-out confrontation with China, the US economy has also been severely hurt, and it must find a new sheep to shear wool. India is the most suitable target. On the one hand, India's economy is large enough for the Americans to cut the knife. On the other hand, India lacks countermeasures against the United States and Western countries. India has no choice but to sell US debt. But India's foreign exchange reserves are far lower than those of major countries such as China and Japan, and its deterrence against the United States is limited. China can counter the United States by banning rare earths and high-tech parts, imposing tariffs on US agricultural products, and prohibiting relevant US companies from entering the Chinese market. India is obviously unilaterally dependent on the West. And even Indian rice has been accused of excessive subsidies by Western countries and included in the anti-dumping investigation list. I have mentioned many times before that although Indians have joined the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and been invited to attend the G7, they have been in the limelight. In fact, in the eyes of Westerners, India is just a pawn. Like a pug, throw a bone when you need to use it and ignore it when you don't need it. Modi stabbed Russia in the back when Russia needed support the most, buying Russian energy at a low price and selling it at a high price. He also wandered between Ukraine and Russia, trying to play the role of a mediator and please both sides. Russia will remember this debt and slowly settle it. As a pawn of the West, India is against China everywhere, and it is obviously impossible to become friends with China. Now that the Americans have put India on the menu, other Western countries have sat down at the table, ready to share the big cake of India. China and Russia will not save India, but will only watch from the sidelines. Perhaps, Modi and his clown colleagues, it is time to reflect on their foreign policy. Perhaps, it is time for the Indian people to open their eyes and drive Modi and BJP out of power.